I was born in the Federal Hill neighborhood of Providence, Rhode Island, in 1936. Back then, it wasn't the vibrant Little Italy people now imagine. It was a working-class enclave, where families of immigrants struggled to find their place in a country that didn't always welcome them. My father, Antonio, was a fruit peddler. He had calloused hands, a third-grade education, and an unshakable belief in America. He'd wake up every morning at 4 a.m., pack his wagon full of fruit, and push it down the streets yelling, apples, oranges, grapes, to the rhythm of a man trying to survive. We weren't rich. In fact, we were often just barely hanging on. But what we lacked in money, we made up for in love. There were 7 of us kids. 7 mouths to feed in a small home with thin walls, a single bathroom, and more dreams than square footage. I remember my mother sewing patches on our pants, cooking pasta from scratch, humming old Neapolitan songs, while she stirred the sauce. She was the heart of the house, stern, devout, and endlessly resilient. Our home had rules: respect your elders, share what you have, and never let someone go hungry. I didn't know it then, but those rules would one day shape the way I judged others. As a kid, I didn't dream of being a judge. That kind of ambition didn't fit in our neighborhood. We were taught to aim for practical jobs. Tailor, butcher, maybe a clerk in a store if you were lucky. But my father had this stubborn idea that education was the key. He didn't have it, but he wanted it for us. He'd come home from the market, exhausted, still smelling of bananas and diesel fumes, and he'd ask me, "Frankie, did you study today?" If I said yes, he'd smile. If I said no, he'd shake his head and say, "Then what are you doing with the gift God gave you?" So I studied. I studied in the basement when it was cold. I studied under the covers with a flashlight when my siblings were asleep. I read everything: newspapers, used textbooks, even the back of cereal boxes. I wasn't the smartest, but I was relentless. I had a hunger that only knowledge could feed. In high school, I was shy. I kept my head down, but I listened. I paid attention to the way people talked, how they treated each other, how teachers disciplined with fairness, or sometimes with bias. I started to wonder, why did some kids get second chances, while others were written off after a single mistake? That thought lingered. It grew roots. I worked my way through school, bagging groceries, sweeping floors, helping my father sell fruit when he needed it. Summers were long and sweaty, but I never complained. Every dollar was a step closer to the dream Father planted in me. One day, my older brother came home in tears. He had been humiliated by a man in a suit who called him just another immigrant kid who'll end up in prison. That night, I made a promise to myself. I'd wear a suit one day too, not to tear people down, but to lift them up. I would never let someone feel small because of where they came from. That promise burned inside me. When it came time for college, the reality hit hard. We didn't have the money, but I applied anyway, scraping together scholarships, working to jobs, and praying for a miracle. I got accepted into Providence College. That day, I walked home with my acceptance letter clenched so tight in my fist, the paper crinkled. My mother cried. My father, well, he didn't cry, but he poured me a glass of wine and said, "Now you begin." College was another world. The kids there wore expensive clothes, talked about vacations in Cape Cod, and drove cars their parents bought. I didn't fit in, not at first, but I kept my head down and did what I'd always done. Worked harder than anyone else. I'd show up early, stay late, ask questions. Every I earned wasn't just a grade. It was another layer of armor. It proved I belonged. I majored in political science, not because I understood it fully at first, but because something about it spoke to me. Government, justice, fairness, those weren't just concepts. They were things I had lived through. I had seen injustice firsthand, and I wanted to understand the system that allowed it, and how it might be changed. But law school, that was another beast entirely. After college, I taught high school, while taking night classes at Suffolk University Law School. I'd grade papers on the train, study cases at midnight, and show up to courtrooms on weekends just to observe how real judges worked. I'll never forget the first time I sat in a courtroom. I was 24, the judge walked in, and the whole room stood. There was silence, weight, power, but it wasn't fear that filled the room. It was something else. It was expectation. The expectation that someone, at least for a moment, held the power to be fair. That's when I knew. I didn't just want to be a lawyer. I wanted to sit in that chair one day. I wanted to be the one people trusted to do the right thing, not for power, not for money, but for that single moment where someone's life could turn. If only someone gave them a chance. After graduating from law school, I passed the bar and set up a small law practice with borrowed furniture and a phone that rarely rang. My clients were ordinary folks, the ones most lawyers overlooked. Landlords who'd been burned, tenants about to be evicted, immigrants terrified of paperwork they didn't understand. These were the people I knew, the people I came from. I didn't wear fancy suits or use big legal words. I sat beside them, looked them in the eye, and said, "We'll figure this out together." And we did. That office became my second home. I'd walk to work, shoes worn from pounding pavement, but heart full of purpose. I was doing something real, not glamorous, not headline worthy, but real. I was helping people navigate a system that scared them. That's where I learned the most important lesson about the law. It wasn't about punishment. It was about people, and most people, if you really listened, didn't want to break the law. They just wanted to be heard. My reputation grew, quietly. Judges started to notice. Prosecutors respected how I handled cases. Fair, steady, unshaken even when things got heated. Eventually, the mayor asked if I would consider becoming a municipal court judge. I was stunned. I didn't come from power. I didn't have connections, but I had something else. The belief that law could be compassionate without losing its strength. I accepted the position. The first time I walked into that courtroom with a robe on my shoulders, I felt the weight. Not just the fabric, but what it represented. The authority to change lives, for better or worse. I didn't want to be feared. I wanted to be trusted. The cases were small: traffic violations, parking tickets, code enforcement. But the people were anything but small. A single mother trying to pay off a fine with 4 kids at home. An elderly veteran who forgot to move his car during street sweeping. A young man arrested for driving without insurance because he had to get to work and couldn't afford it. Those stories stuck with me, and slowly, something in me shifted. I started asking questions most judges didn't. Not just did you do it, but why? Why were you speeding? Why didn't you pay the ticket? Why are you here? And what do you need? Sometimes, the answers broke my heart. Other times, they made me laugh, but they always made me care. One day, a woman came in with her 6-year-old son. She had 5 parking tickets and couldn't pay. Her boy stood beside her, holding her hand, eyes wide, scared. I asked him, "What do you think I should do with your mom?" He looked at me and whispered, "Give her another chance." I did. Moments like that reminded me. Justice isn't about crushing people. It's about seeing them, helping them get back up without losing their dignity. Word spread about how I ran my court. Not harsh, but human. Not soft, but fair. People who dreaded the courtroom began showing up with a strange sense of hope. It wasn't because they thought I'd let them off. It was because they knew they'd be treated like people. One morning, a TV producer asked to sit in and film a few cases. I was hesitant. I wasn't interested in cameras. But he assured me it would help show people what real justice could look like. So I said yes, reluctantly. That first clip, a man crying because he couldn't afford his ticket and explaining he'd just lost his wife. I listened. I reduced his fine. And at the end, I told him, "I hope today makes things just a little easier for you." The video went viral overnight. Suddenly, people around the country, even around the world, were watching. My courtroom was no longer a quiet municipal hall in Providence. It was a window into something rare, a legal system that didn't just enforce laws, but uplifted lives. The show became known as Court in Providence. I didn't change for the cameras. I was still the same judge, just with more eyes watching. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe people needed to see that the law could be merciful, that judges could be human, and that justice didn't have to mean humiliation. But not everyone was happy. Some critics accused me of being too lenient. "You're not tough enough," one said. "You're running a sympathy court, not a courtroom." That one stung, because they didn't see what I saw. The fear in people's eyes, the quiet desperation behind their fines, the invisible battles they were fighting. I didn't respond with anger. I responded by staying true to who I was. One of the hardest moments in my career came when a teenage boy came before me for reckless driving. His parents were devastated. He had nearly caused an accident. I looked him in the eye and said, "You're on a road that will destroy you. But I'm giving you one chance. One. You blow it, you're done." That boy turned his life around. Years later, he returned to my court, not as a defendant, but as a law student. He said, "Judge, you saved me." That moment, it was worth every criticism, every attack, every doubter. Because justice isn't just about guilt, it's about grace. The media attention grew. People sent letters from across the globe, thanking me, sharing their stories, begging for fairness in their own towns. I read every letter. Some made me weep, others made me furious at how cold and mechanical their courts had become. That's when I realized I wasn't just a judge anymore. I was a reminder that law is not just black and white, it's human. And maybe, just maybe, that message was bigger than me. The older I got, the more I thought about the finish line. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to end this journey the same way I started it, with intention. I never stayed on the bench for prestige or power. I stayed because I believed in people. But time has its way. After decades of holding that gavel, I began to feel it. Not in my bones, but in my heart. My calling had never been about the rules. It was about connection, and I knew, someday, the bench would no longer be mine. Before I stepped down, something unexpected happened. I was invited to Harvard to speak about compassion in justice. Imagine that. A kid from Federal Hill, whose parents barely spoke English, standing in front of the brightest minds in the country. Not to talk about constitutional law, but about human dignity. That night, I shared the story of a woman who'd come into my courtroom with a crying infant in one arm and 3 parking tickets in the other. She didn't make excuses. She said, "Your Honor, I messed up, but I'm trying." I forgave the fines, gave her a chance. After the speech, a young law student approached me, her eyes welling with tears. She said, "Judge, I saw that video when I was 14. It made me want to become a lawyer. I want to be the kind of attorney who lifts people up." That moment, that was worth more than 1,000 rulings. Soon after, I made it official. I was retiring. The courtroom was packed on my final day. Lawyers, police officers, defendants I'd once scolded. They all showed up. Some brought flowers, others just brought gratitude. I tried not to cry, but I did. And I didn't care, because that room wasn't just a court. It was a cathedral of second chances. They asked me what I'd do next. Write a book, give speeches, host another show. I said, "I'm going home to be with my wife." People laughed, but I meant it. She had supported me through every late night, every heavy case, every loss and every triumph. Now it was my turn to support her. But retirement didn't mean silence. The videos kept circulating. My courtroom became a beacon in countries I'd never even visited. I started receiving letters from Africa, the Philippines, Brazil. All from people who didn't just want fair laws, they wanted kind laws. That's when I realized My real legacy wasn't in the citations I dismissed or the fines I reduced. It was in hope I had, without planning it, reminded the world that the law didn't have to be cold. It could be warm. It could heal. And that legacy grew. One day, a teacher from Kentucky sent me a classroom photo. Her 5th graders had watched my videos and started their own kindness court. Every week, they'd hear cases from classmates, forgetting homework, talking in class, or teasing. And instead of punishment, they handed out hugs, apologies, or extra help. I smiled for a long time looking at that picture. Because that was justice, pure, simple, human. Now, I spend my mornings reading. I walk through the neighborhood, still greeting everyone with a smile. Some call me Your Honor, some just call me Frank. But no matter the title, I know who I am. I'm a kid from Providence who grew up watching his father wash floors at night, so his sons could dream. I'm a man who held a gavel not to punish, but to listen. I'm a husband, a father, and a believer that the smallest act of kindness can echo through generations. And if my life stands for anything, let it stand for this. Compassion is not weakness, mercy is not surrender. And justice, real justice, begins with understanding. So if you ever find yourself in a courtroom, on either side, remember that everyone has a story. Everyone has battles you can't see. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a judge can say is, I believe in you. This was never about fame, never about the spotlight. It was always about that one person who needed someone to care. And every time I saw them, I did. If this story touched you, reminded you of your own journey, or gave you a glimpse into the power of kindness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. On this channel, we bring you stories of betrayal, revenge, history, and justice. From emperors to everyday heroes like Judge Caprio, let these stories live on. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable stories are the real ones.